Year 6, it's Miss Joyce again. I'm going to read the next part of Billy the Kid by Michael Morpurgo to you today. I really hope that you enjoyed the first part of the book yesterday. If you want to share with me your thoughts about the book, or if you've got any book recommendations, books that you think that I should read, then please feel free to send them to the Year 6 email address. By the time I was 17, I was selected for the Chelsea reserve side, on the right wing, where I belonged, where I was best. The first match I ever played for Chelsea reserves was against Arsenal reserves. There weren't many there to watch, but Mum came, and Joe and Emmy and Ozzy, and they saw me score 2 goals. One was a simple enough tap-in, but the other I really enjoyed. A dribble in towards goal, slipping the ball through the legs of one defender, round another, and then a little chip in over the goalie. I can still see the look on his face as the ball floated over his head and into the goal. Horror, disbelief, despair, all in one. It was lovely. I was in the newspapers the following day. Billy the Kid bamboozles the Arsenal. For the whole of the next year I was a regular in the Chelsea reserves, and I was a regular in the newspapers too. I didn't think life could get any better, but it did, for a while at least. 1939 began as the best year of my life. Towards the end of that football season, I was picked for the first team. 12th of March 1939, just a month or so before my 19th birthday. I trotted out in my Chelsea shirt for the very first time. I was on cloud 9, 7th heaven. We were playing Preston North End away, and we lost, badly. No one was looking at me, that was for sure. I was awful, leaden-legged and useless. Ozzy, who came to all my matches, took me to one side afterwards and said that I had to forget about the shirt. I had to forget who I was playing for, where I was playing, all of that, and just play my game. When we played Sunderland the next week at home, it was like I was in the playground again, or at school, or out in the park with Joe. I ran rings round them, laid on a couple of goals and scored one myself. That was the first time I heard the crowd at the shed end chanting my name. Billy, Billy the Kid, Billy, Billy the Kid. It sends warm tingles down my spine even now just to think of it. Before the season ended 3 weeks later, I had scored 7 more goals, and all the papers were saying I'd be playing for England within the year. One paper called me Billy the Wonder Kid. Another said I was as good as Stanley Matthews, maybe better. It would have gone to my head a lot worse than it did if it hadn't been for Ozzy. Don't read all that stuff, Billy, he told me. Don't even look at it. It's not good for you. Let your mum cut it out and stick it in a scrapbook. You can read it all later when you're older, because it won't hurt you then. Mum did put it all away in a scrapbook. She was always taking it out and looking at it and showing it, but it disappeared, like everything else. That summer, Mum married again. She married Ozzy, and I never even saw it coming. Joe and me were both best men, and Emmy was the bridesmaid. So the man who'd whacked me at school, who'd taught me most of my football, who'd been like a father to me since Dad died, and a real friend to the family too, became my second father. It couldn't have been better. It was a great day for all of us, confetti everywhere, and a huge wedding cake made like a football pitch in Chelsea blue icing. And then they went off to Broadstairs for a week's honeymoon. They were still away on the 3rd of September when war was declared. Another thing that I hadn't seen coming. I'd been too busy with my football to worry about what was going on in the world outside. To start with, the war didn't seem to matter that much anyway, because not a lot was really happening. What did the newspapers call it? The phony war or something? Then suddenly in our house, it wasn't phony at all. Joe made up his mind that he ought to go and join up. He'd be 17 in a month and he could join up as soon as he could. I thought he was joking at first. We all did, but he wasn't joking at all. He was so determined about it and so sure it was right too. It was simple, he said. Hitler was evil, just plain evil. He'd invaded Czechoslovakia and Poland. What was to stop him from coming over and invading England if we didn't fight him? Mum said he was far too young to go. So did Ozzy. And I told him that our dad wouldn't have wanted it, how he'd warned me never to go to war. I told him what I believed too, that it could never be right to kill another human, no matter what. We had our first big, blazing argument. He wouldn't listen. Not to me, not to anyone. It was his life, he said, and he'd live it or lose it the way he wanted. The argument went on and on. I said terrible things I can't forget, and he said terrible things too, things that I can't forget either. about how he'd always looked up to me, until now, about how all I wanted to do was play my lousy football and forget about the rest of the world. It didn't come to fisticuffs, but we weren't that far off. In the end, we just stopped speaking to each other. One morning, Joe upped and left without telling anyone, and the next we heard from him was from a training camp on Salisbury Plain. He wrote Mum a card. He'd be off to France soon, he said, and he sent lots of love to all of us. He came home on leave once, but I was away playing football. Mum told me he looked really grand in his uniform, that I should be proud of him. Deep down I was, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him, or ever write and tell him. I never wrote to him, and he never wrote to me. In the dark days of 1940, we listened to all the news broadcasts we could. Everyone did. The news from France was worse every day. The army was surrounded and being driven back to Dunkirk. There were thousands and thousands of men on the beaches, all the army we had, and a whole armada of little boats was going over to pick up as many as they could. There were pictures in the newspapers of the soldiers being helped off the ships, wounded, bedraggled, beaten, and after that it looked like invasion was a dead certainty. Then the telegram came. Joe had been killed at Dunkirk, but only Emmy could cry. The rest of us just sat there in the kitchen with the clock ticking, Ozzy with his arm round Mum, each of us alone with our sadness. I went out after a while and I sat in the park on this very same bench that I'm sitting on now, and I wept like a baby. I joined up the next day. I couldn't stay out of the war, not now, not anymore. Nowadays, the squirrels here are as tame as you like. I've had them right up on the bench next to me before now. They don't come for love, they just come for food, and I know that. But this one here, he's sitting by my boot. He's not having any of my sausage roll, no matter how much he makes eyes at me. There were squirrels about on the day that I joined up. They were chasing each other up the trunk of that old tree by the park gates. A branch came off that one last winter. It smashed the bench below into little pieces. The squirrel's washing his nose now. I like it when they do that. Oh, go on then. All right, have a bit of sausage roll, but only a little bit. Back then, Chelsea tried to stop me. Mr. Knighton told me I had a great future in football and that football would go on somehow, war or no war, but Mum didn't even try to talk me out of it, nor did Ozzy. They understood. I joined the Royal Army Medical Corps. I'd be driving ambulances and working in field hospitals. This way at least I'd be doing something for Joe. That's what I thought. That's what I told myself. So there I was. I found myself dressed in khaki and running up hills in full battle order and learning how to march and turn left and turn right and about turn and swing my arms in time with everyone else. I learnt how to shoot a rifle and a gun and how to bayonet a stuffed dummy. I learnt how to polish boots too, army boots this time, not football boots. Then we ran up more hills, lots more, until we'd completed our basic training. Before they sent me off to war 6 months later, they taught me how to drive an ambulance, how to dress wounds, put on splints for broken bones, take temperatures, carry stretchers. I never had much time to play football, but I did think about it, and I missed it too. The excitement, the roar of the crowds, all of it. The boys knew who I was, of course, and they ribbed me a bit to begin with, but they soon forgot all about that, and so did I. I was just Billy again, not Billy the kid. The football part of my life was over. I tried to put it out of my mind. I'd pick it up again where I'd left off when the war was finished and done with. I only had one leave before I was sent overseas, and in a way I wish that I'd never gone home. Joe was just a photo on the mantelpiece now, and Mum was tearful every time she looked at me. She's frightened of losing you as well, Ozzy told me just before I left. Emmy gave me her little gold cross to keep me safe and hugged me as if she'd never let go. I walked away from her, away from all of them, and I took the train down to Southampton to join the troop ship. We knew we were going to the North African desert, but we didn't know where, not exactly. It was my first time on a ship, and to begin with I hated it. I kept thinking of the submarines lurking under the sea, and I couldn't swim either. But I soon forgot all about the submarines. Someone had made a football out of rags, and word had got around on the ship that I was Billy the Kid from Chelsea. For a few hours every day we'd play football up on the deck, well, a kind of football anyway, and I could forget about where I was and what I was going to do. But in the evenings, alone on the deck with just the sea and the sky, that's when I talked to Joe. I talked to him a lot. I've always talked to Joe ever since, especially when I need him, mostly when I'm very sad or when I'm very happy. We landed at Tobruk in pitch darkness and drove the convoy of ambulances off into the desert. We could hear the rumble of the guns, see the whole night sky lit up ahead of us. Like a terrific thunderstorm it was, but without any rain. Then the sun came up over the desert, big and red, and we saw what sort of place we'd come to. Nothing but rocks and sand as far as the eye could see, and hundreds of our soldiers streaming past us, retreating back towards Tobruk on foot, in lorries. We set up our field hospital right beside the road where the wounded were waiting, standing on the sand in their hundreds. Only a stone's throw away from them, the dead were lying in rows waiting to be buried. They lay so still. It was my first day of war, and my last, as it turned out. I'll leave it there, and I'll film the next part for the next video. Bye.